Welcome to episode 3 of this Conversation Matters podcast. And I'm Dr. Susan Protasio, your host. Today, we have another insightful conversation that we're going to share with you. And the topic is Beyond Borders Understanding Immigration Trauma. And I would like to welcome back Dr. Ernely Navarro as our guest. She was my guest on episode 2, and we were discussing then belonging and fitting in. So welcome back, Dr. Navarro.
Thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, I'm a first-generation Filipino immigrant. My family migrated here when I was 14. And in my current role as a cultural community liaison for Riverside County's behavioral health, and I'm also a leadership coach and trainer for the leadership education for Asian Pacific. I work with diverse groups of Asian Pacific immigrants and their families. And so this topic obviously is one that is a very core of the work that I do.
Yeah. Because we have a growing Asian American, communities in Inland Empire, and what we see normally are or being discussed are like topics on immigrants that are based on policies and who are documented or not documented, and it is very seldom that we talk about or see it in the newspaper. Like, how about immigration trauma? These people, the migrants, they experience immigration trauma. And for us Filipinos, we have a lot of Filipinos migrating to the U.S. or to other countries as well, looking for a better life, financial stability. So it makes me wonder, what is immigration trauma, So can you explain it or expound further on it?
Yeah, so there's a lot, and appreciate that you pointed that out. That a lot of the conversation on immigration tends to be politicized. We don't look at the mental health aspect of it, or the impact on the family and the relationship with other people. So immigration trauma is one of those things that's a little bit more complicated. So kind of explain it in a shorter sense. In that, if you're looking at immigration trauma in different phases, right? So there are trauma that happens before they even leave their original country. So before, meaning some of them have experienced war and violence within their countries. Or, think about all the different things that's happened in Asia, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and even World War II, so all of that. And then poverty, climate changes, so there's a lot of typhoons and tsunami, all of those other things that's prior to coming to here are part of their trauma experience. And then the during part or during phase of the immigration, there are also for some groups experience dangers. So especially for the refugees, so the journey here itself is dangerous. And then when we arrive here, there's another layer of trauma, of adjusting. And of course, there's a lot of that uncertainty. We experience racism and discrimination, unemployment at first when you're trying to, and then the acculturation stress that comes with adjusting to a new environment. So when you look at all of those different phases of the immigration, each phase comes with it different stressful or high level of stress that can be traumatic for different people.
Yeah, and those were never discussed. And as I was reading about immigration trauma, and I was like, oh my goodness, so there is such thing as like pre-migration trauma. And like Filipinos, we, our families, you would sell your property, you would take a loan, or whatever it's gonna help to get money to pay for the plane fare. And then so that's a lot of stress that you left your family and everything like that. But we seldom talk about it. We just kind of move ahead, move forward, and just go to whatever you're planning to migrate to. But and it makes me wonder, so probably what's the impact then of that immigration trauma, because there's several phases that they go through, and they're probably, the migrants are not even aware that they're going into that 4 phases,
So that example that you were giving earlier about what it takes for a family to send to come here to save saving money. So you can imagine for that migrant who's coming here, a lot of pressure, already and to succeed and to work. So that added stress of having to support the family
Yes.
back home and then not disappoint
And
them.
then repay the loan.
And then, yeah, so there's a lot of that other piece, you know, that comes with what we are experiencing. And so with that, then again, we were talking, you know, I was mentioning about stress. And so often when what they experience, they just dismiss it as stress, you know. So but stress, there's different types of stress.
Right.
And so when you get to that point of things accumulating, like the pre and the during, and then when they arrive and then it's prolonged, it reaches that toxic level stress. And so that's the first thing that people mislabel their experience as just, oh, this is just stress, this is you know, just normal, common. And it could be, but when it's prolonged, then that's where our bodies can't take that.
Right. And sometimes we interpret it as like a psychosomatic. You have a headache, you have a backache.
Right, that's how it shows up.
You know, and sometimes your tummy aches or you're tired, but then you just attribute it, oh, I'm tired because I'm getting, you know, 2 jobs.
Yeah.
But it's not seen or it's not appreciated as, okay, this could be like a symptom of migration trauma.
Yeah. So again, all of those, and then it's not just physically that it shows, right? So that's when we, you know, like you said, the headache, blood pressure, it shows up. But it also shows up in our relationship. And so it shows up in the family, as far as the relationship with their children, with other people. It shows up in the workplace as well. In our behavior, you know, so if we're irritable, you know, then, and that sometimes it's some of that is related to it, you know, not all of it, of course, but then, like I said, it's that whole accumulation of different things that's going on. And when it's not addressed or not treated, then it becomes bigger as far as a problem, and when it's not being addressed. You know,
just like this Filipino friend of mine, she's new to the job. She was hired in HR, but then it's only 2 months, and she's telling me, I think I need to quit. And I say, why? The place, I don't feel like it's for me. So I think probably there are some symptoms of that trauma probably that she has to kind of come to terms, or probably kind of, what do you call it, like realize that it's happening? You know?
So having that awareness is one.
The awareness.
The other part that's also a challenge for our communities is there's shame attached to a lot of these symptoms, and when you're also having to recognize and admit that you're struggling and having difficulty, you know, we don't want people to see that, you know, and so we don't want to accept it for ourselves, and we don't even want other people to, you know what we're going through. And so, let alone seeking help, you know, so that's the part where when we keep it to ourselves and not having people to talk about it, to process it, to figure out like what's going on, to get the support that we need, it makes it more difficult. It's that compounded, you know, part of it. So, and I think also the stigma around mental health. So if you're saying you're depressed or anxiety, you know, there's people misinterpret that as like severe mental illness versus just having mental health struggles that's associated with having to adjust, you know, to a new country, to associated for leaving, you know, what you left, you know, in your home country, and having all of that add up, you know. So it makes it difficult when you attach shame, when we attach shame to having to talk about it, and also getting help or asking for help.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because this last year, May 2024, we did a workshop on mental health, and as I was reading on some information, I came across that in the Filipino culture, when you ask or seek help for mental health concerns or issues, in our culture, there's a stigma attached to it. The person is labeled either as crazy, or it is a shame, or the family cannot be seen with a family member seeking mental health resources. You know, so that prevents people or Filipinos from seeking help.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, I don't know how we could, step away or get away
Yeah.
from that stigma, but I think it's kind of ingrained in us because that's what, we learned when we were way back in the Philippines. It's a Filipino culture. And another thing also is, I think the religiosity of the Filipinos, when they feel something, stress or anything, they would pray, and then that hopefully it goes away. Or probably, I don't know, probably it helps. I think it helps, but to a certain point, they have to recognize also that probably they need help, like professional mental health.
Yeah, we need a
You
lot
know?
of different coping strategies
Right.
in our toolkit in
Yeah.
order to deal with all of those different issues, right?
Yeah.
Because on top of what we are calling immigration trauma, there are other things that's also happening within the family.
Right.
So, for example, there might be a history of child abuse, domestic violence, or family violence, substance abuse,
Right.
that are also part of that
Simultaneously happening.
with everything else
Right.
going on. And so again, and like you pointed out, I think it's typical or common in Asian cultures where because we are a collective, that what I'm going through, it's not just bringing shame to me, it's bringing shame to my whole family.
Right.
And so we hide it,
Right,
and we
right.
don't, so we just deal with it within our family, deal with it with close knit of people that
Right.
we trust. And so, and you can if you have the knowledge and because for me, even though I'm a licensed therapist, I'm not going to be able to treat my own family. The best I could do is really
Yeah.
to be there to understand
Yes.
and also to educate them and then encourage them to get the professional help, because I
yes.
can't be their therapist,
Right.
but I could be there to educate them
Yeah.
and to try to remove the stigma around mental health. It's interesting because my dad, after my mom passed away, he was depressed, and I knew that, but then the best he could do, like when you said oftentimes they go to the doctor,
Yes.
we give them like, I have
Yeah.
this pain, I have that.
Yeah.
So for him, it was like he couldn't sleep, and so that's one of those symptoms.
Right,
So and then I
right.
told him, okay, well, next time you go to the doctor, tell him you haven't been able to sleep since your wife died. So that was like I had to give him the
Yes.
prompting to explain it to the doctor.
Right.
So then the doctor obviously kind of got it, and prescribed him an antidepressant. But for him, it was like a sleeping,
Yeah.
it's to solve the sleeping problem, not the
I
depression.
know. And there's another issue on that, or another take on that, because we did a presentation a while ago about mental health, and men, they are found to be, they kind of subscribe still to this stigma that they have to be strong enough to take care of their own thing. They delay seeking help and going to the doctor, and when they go to the doctor, they hold the information, they don't give the information.
Yeah.
So probably that's the same thing too.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
similar to that. But I also wanted to point out what you said earlier about, relying on our faith, which
Right.
is a huge part of being
Right.
able to cope with the situation. The other part that we also tend to see in a lot of Asian culture is we have some of the more traditional way of dealing with those issues or problem. And so, so some of those are kind of like some more superstition, type of healing,
Yes.
but it's just different way, And so again, it's part of those pieces that are helping in a way, but it's not lasting,
Right,
like
right.
lasting to deal with it. So being able to, one of the things I think that's challenging for immigrants is that not understanding the different way of the healthcare system that
Right,
we have,
yeah.
And so in a lot of our different Asian countries, the mental health services is not
Yeah,
as
yeah,
expansive
it
as
is, yeah.
here. And so they're very limited to really understanding what it's all about. So
Yeah.
one of the things that we have to educate is to understand it's, not just talk therapy. There's a lot
Right.
of other pieces that comes with being able to heal the trauma.
Right.
that they experience, and it's not just talking,
Right, right.
and dealing with that. So there's a lot of educating, there's a lot of other somatic things that we could do to help them. Definitely resiliency skills, that would be helpful, for our community. So
yeah, and then the other reasons probably is because when we look at immigrants, we kind of like group them together as like one basket of immigrants. We never look or take into consideration that they're bringing in those different experiences that they have. So now when you know or you see them and you're immigrant, you just label them, oh, okay, this is your problem. But it is beyond that, because they came in with different experiences, different trauma. And so now they would present, of course, differently from each other.
Right, yeah. So again, that lumping that you're talking about, so a lot of times when we say immigrant, we automatically, it's really the first generation, but we're also talking about second generation, third generation, because that trauma that is experienced gets passed down to the different generations. So that intergenerational trauma that is, often don't realize that our children experience it, and then if it's not addressed, our children's children, again, because then it shows up with our children observing how we're coping with the situation. So they're learning from us on how to deal with the problem or situation, or if it's, again, if there's violence in the family, then some of that, gets become normalized, right? So it gets passed on. So being able to break that cycle and really addressing that, yes, it's not just the immigrant who came here, but it's also impacting their second and third generation and other family members, as well.
So I've seen that but I think the reason that it's persisting is, I think most Asian Americans, like the older generation, they don't really seek help. But then the younger ones are the ones that more open to like mental health services. So in our community, what are the resources that we have, especially like here in Inland Empire?
Yeah. Well, see, and that's some of the issues also, right? Because then the more traditional parents, they'll opt for the traditional way of dealing with the problem. And then whereas with the younger generation, they're more exposed to, the Western way medicine. So they're exposed to in schools, they're learning social emotional learning. So it's okay to express your emotion, but at home it's not okay. So there's all of that. So it's really being able to help them navigate again, that, for the younger generation being able to seek that help, but then it really also requires the whole family, because you can't just treat, that youth or that young adult or that adult, but then really having the impact on the whole family for this. So, again, with here, there's a lot of, the counties, each counties have behavioral health programs. There are Asian American programs that specifically tailored, that are culturally, and linguistically congruent or relevant to the person. Again, it's very different when you're having a therapist who understands your culture already versus someone who doesn't, because then you have to explain, and then so some of those nuances, right? So it's important to have that available to us. The other piece, I think there's a lot of what we do in the education. So I'm also a certified community resiliency model teacher. So that's through the Trauma Resource Institute. So a lot of what we empower the people who attend this workshop is to learn resiliency skills, so that they can, learn how to manage, those different symptoms, and pay attention to what's happening already,
to
that
your
body
body
signals. Our body is already signaling, and so it's a set. So if you go to their website, there are workshops that you can watch, but then there's, in the community, we offer different workshops as well to learn these concepts. And then there's an app, it's called iChill,
the iChill app,
Chill. And so on that app, from the Trauma Resource Institute, you can learn, these different wellness skills, and also learn to really understand of the neurobiology of what's happening to your body
Right.
when you experience these traumatic events.
Because your
And not
body
just-
will let you know.
Right, yeah. So it's not just like, it's not about a mental weakness or,
Right.
but it's really is what's happening.
Right, right, right. And also, I think another thing that would help the immigrant, I came across this article that, like us Filipinos, when you migrate here, access to your culture also helps because it makes you
yeah.
connect
Yeah.
to your culture even if you are here already. And then the host country, they also like hold, activities that I could participate and see their culture too.
Yeah.
So I like it. I like that article. So like the Filipinos, you have your Simbang Gabi, which happens every December, right? The Dawn Mass, which we honor our Virgin Mary and Jesus, right? So that's a good one. And other activities too. So I think the immigrants should have that opportunity to be able to connect to their
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah, no,
know?
I mean, it's all of that because that's
Yeah.
part of who we
Yeah.
are. Whether or you're second or third generation,
Yes.
it is part of our identity. And so that's why even with some of our youth, they're just rediscovering, kind of
Yes.
what it means to be, from both culture.
Or
you know.
trace or learn your roots where
Right.
you came from, right? It makes you
Yeah.
proud that, oh, this is where I came from. This is
Yeah.
my culture.
Yeah,
And in that way, it helps you kind of, even if you have that trauma within the family, it helps you to understand. And when you understand them, it makes you more accepting. Isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah.
It makes you more accepting.
Well, and then see, we really also do need that community, as far as like that safety in numbers, in a way. So, because now even more so, like we saw it during COVID-19, where the Chinese, or if you look Chinese, coronavirus is
Right.
being blamed. And so there's that increased anti-Asian hate, or hate crime against Asians. And so now, more so with, all these immigration policies, that problem is going to continue to
Right,
increase.
right.
That fear in our community, of families being separated. So this whole immigration trauma is not just like the process of coming,
Right.
but now we're adding this systemic issue
To
with
the
the
immigration
policies
trauma.
that's changing around immigration. It's adding another level of stress to our communities, of having to
Yes,
worry
yeah,
about, okay, now they
yeah.
won't be able to go visit. They're worrying if they can come back,
Right.
families being, so there's a lot, that we have to, as a community, try to support each other and educate and advocate, for,
Right.
like making sure that these policies, are not going to impact negatively or like change them,
Yeah.
So
I know it's huge. This topic or conversation of immigration trauma is huge. I think we're just only scraping the
Yeah.
the top
Right.
of it. So
and we'll see more in
Yeah, as
terms
we-
of
yeah,
as
as
it
we-
develops, but we already can anticipate
Right.
it because we know, it's happened in the past,
Yeah.
like with Chinese Exclusion Act, with,
Yeah.
who becomes citizen and not citizen,
Right.
we know. Yeah.
That's why I decided to discuss this immigration trauma in the podcast, so people that are watching or listening would understand that there is such thing as pre-migration trauma in transit, and then once you arrive here, you still have that trauma. So, is there anything else that you need to add?
Yeah, well, there's a lot, right? So really is, again, being able to recognize that you don't have to go suffer alone, and that there are different support system out there, but yet rely on what you already use as a resource,
Right.
to help you, and that's kept you resilient.
Yeah.
But there are other skills that you can add
Right.
to your
right.
toolkit so that could make you healthier or maintain your health,
Right,
as opposed to having to suffer in silence or to just ignore,
Okay.
some of those symptoms.
Yes.
And a lot of times, people who experience those trauma live,
I know.
less, so we don't want that. We want
Yes.
them to have healthy,
Yeah.
long life.
Long
Yeah.
life. Thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate it. So hopefully we were able to bring you awareness and understanding of what immigration trauma is, and hopefully you find it helpful if you are undergoing any challenges as a migrant families, if you have questions or topics that you want to be included in our podcast, email us at convomatters@yahoo.com. And I will see you in the next episode. That would be episode 4. And we will be discussing intergenerational relationships. So I hope you enjoyed our show. So thank you so much and take care and blessings.